Todd sat beside Will in the living room, his hands folded together like he was trying to keep himself calm. Will, Todd said softly, the judge involved with Linda's case needs you to share your side. Will looked down at his AAC tablet. His hands shook a little before he started typing. Will typed, Dad, only if I don't see her. Todd swallowed hard, you might, son. Will's eyes filled fast. Will typed, then no, I can't, Dad, I really can't see her. Todd leaned closer, I know, son, I know. Bate walked in from the kitchen and stopped when she saw Will's face. What happened? Todd looked up at her. Judge Matthew wants Will's side about Linda. Bate's face dropped. In court. Todd nodded. Maybe. They said we can ask for accommodations, but they can't promise he won't see her yet. Will typed fast. I said no, I can't see her, I can't hear her, I can't be in the same building as her. Bate came over and knelt in front of his power chair. Will, nobody is going to force you to do something that breaks you. Todd said, I'm not trying to force him, I just want the judge to understand what Linda did. Will typed, it feels like you are forcing me. Todd's face cracked, I'm sorry, I should have said it better. Will turned his chair a little, like even talking about Linda made the room too small. Will typed, I don't want to prove I'm hurt, I am hurt, why do I have to explain it to strangers? Bate wiped her eyes, because sometimes the system needs to hear it from you. Henry came down the stairs and froze, what's going on? Todd shook his head, not now, Henry. Will typed, Linda. Henry's whole face changed, oh. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Henry walked closer, Will, you don't have to be brave for them. Will typed, the judge wants my side. Henry looked at Todd, can he write it like not go there? Todd nodded slowly, that's what I'm going to ask. A written statement, video statement, remote testimony, anything where he doesn't have to face Linda. Will stared at his father. Will typed, you can ask that. Todd nodded, yes, I should have said that first, I'm sorry. Will's shoulders dropped a little, but he still looked scared. Will typed, I can write it, but I'm not seeing her, if they say I have to, then I'm done. Bate squeezed his hand, then that's the line. Todd nodded, that's the line. Henry pulled a chair over and sat near Will. I'll help if you want, not with the words, but I can sit here. Will looked at Henry and typed, no jokes. Henry held up both hands, no jokes. Will looked back down at the tablet. Todd said, we don't have to do it tonight. Will typed, no, if I don't start I won't do it. Bate sat beside him. Todd grabbed Will's blue notebook and placed it on the table. Henry stayed quiet. Will stared at the blank page for a long time. Then he typed, my name is Will, and Linda made me scared in my own life. The room went silent. Todd covered his mouth and turned his head, trying not to break down. Will kept typing. She made me feel like my body was something people could use against me. She made my room not feel like my room. She made me afraid to sleep. She made me feel trapped. Henry looked down at the floor, his jaw tight. Will typed, I don't want revenge. I want her to stay away from me forever. Bate whispered, that's good, baby. Will shook his head. Will typed, it's not good, it's true. Todd moved closer, truth is enough, son. Will looked at him with tired eyes. Will typed, Dad, if I cry, don't stop me. Todd's eyes filled, I won't. Will typed, and if I get mad, don't tell me to calm down. Todd nodded, I won't. Will typed, and if I want to quit, remind me I'm safe now. Todd reached for Will's hand, you're safe now, and I'll remind you every time. Will looked back at the tablet and kept typing. Even though she is my father's mother, she wasn't, isn't, and is never going to be a grandmother to me. Todd looked down. Bate covered her mouth. Will kept going. I act like a little kid every time I go to bed now at 25 because Linda got some guy to kidnap me and take me somewhere unknown. She took my iPad because she said I used it too much, but because of my cerebral palsy I can't talk verbally that well. Todd's eyes filled with tears. Will typed, she kept saying that what I'm living in my life is fake, but it's not fake. This is my life, my body is real, my chair is real, my tablet is real, my fear is real, what she did to me is real. Henry swallowed hard, anything else? Will looked at Henry, then back at the tablet. Will typed, put my name, I'm fucking done with Linda. The room went silent. Todd nodded slowly, okay. Will typed no hiding, no calling her grandma, no saying she meant well, no saying family is family, she is Linda. Bate put her hand on Will's shoulder, that is your truth. Will typed, I want the judge to know I don't feel safe around her, I don't want her near me, I don't want her near my house, I don't want her to call, I don't want letters, I don't want messages through other people. Todd said I'll put all of that in. Will typed and I don't want to see her face in court. Todd nodded, I'll tell them that too. Will's face twisted like he was trying not to cry, but the tears came anyway. Will typed, I hate that I have to say this, I hate that I have to prove this, I hate that she made me scared of bedtime, bedtime was supposed to be safe. Henry's voice cracked, Will typed no let me finish. Henry nodded fast, okay. Will typed every night dad checks the window because of her, every night I need help calming down because of her, every night my room feels like it can turn bad again because of her. Todd wiped his face with his sleeve. Will looked at him. Will typed dad don't cry yet, I need you to write. Todd breathed in hard, okay I'm writing. Bate helped copy the words into the notebook. Will typed, Linda didn't just scare me one night, she changed how I feel in my own home, she changed how I feel in my own body, she made me feel like because I'm disabled people can decide for me. He paused. Then he typed slower. But she was wrong. Todd looked up. Will typed, I decide now, my parents help me but they listen to me, Henry helps me but he listens to me, Linda never listened, she wanted control. Henry whispered, damn right. Bate gave him a look. Henry said sorry but he's right. Will almost smiled but it disappeared fast. Will typed, I want my name on it because I'm not hiding from Linda anymore, I'm scared but I'm not hiding. Todd read the words back softly. My name is Will and I am asking the court to protect me from Linda. Will looked at the sentence. Then he typed yes. Bate said that's strong. Will typed it doesn't feel strong. Todd said brave doesn't always feel strong son, sometimes it feels like shaking and doing it anyway. Will looked away. Will typed then I'm brave and tired. Henry leaned back in his chair, that might be the most Will thing you ever typed. Will gave him a tired look. Henry held up his hands, no joke I mean it. Todd put the notebook down, Will we can stop here. Will shook his head. Will typed no one more thing. Everyone waited. Will typed Linda is not my grandmother, she is the person who hurt me, I want the judge to know that. Todd nodded, tears running down his face, I'll make sure they know. The next day, Todd went to the courthouse with Will's letter folded carefully in his hand. He had barely slept. Bate had stayed up with him, reading the letter over and over, making sure every word was Will's truth. When Todd stepped into Judge Matthew's office, his stomach was tight. Judge Matthew looked up from his desk, Mr. Carter, come in. Todd walked in slowly and placed the letter on the desk. This is from Will, Todd said. He wrote it himself on his AAC tablet. Bate and Henry helped copy it, but these are his words. Judge Matthew picked up the letter and started reading. Todd stood there with his hands locked together. The judge's face changed as he read. The room got quiet except for the sound of paper moving in his hands. After a while, Judge Matthew looked up. He is this afraid of your mother? Todd swallowed hard. Not only him, everyone feels like that now. We protect him because he feels shame for telling us. He thinks he destroyed the family. Judge Matthew leaned back in his chair. Todd's voice cracked. Bate and I told him it isn't his fault, but he doesn't believe it all the way yet. Linda made him feel like speaking up was wrong. She made him feel like needing help made him weak. She took his iPad, Judge. That is his voice. Judge Matthew looked back at the letter. Todd kept going. Will has cerebral palsy. He can type, but verbally it's hard for him. That tablet is how he tells us what he needs, what he feels. When he's scared, when he's hurt, Linda took that from him and then acted like she knew better. Judge Matthew's jaw tightened. Todd said he told us he would only share his side if he didn't have to see her. If seeing Linda is the only way, then he won't do it, and I'm not going to force him. The judge nodded slowly, I understand. Todd shook his head. I don't think anyone really does. My son acts like a little kid every night because of what happened. He asks me to check the window. He asks me to make sure the door is locked. He gets scared in his own room. That room used to be safe. Judge Matthew put the letter down carefully. Mr. Carter will does not need to be in the same room as Linda for me to hear him. Todd froze. What? Judge Matthew said, I can accept the written statement. I can allow remote testimony, separate room testimony, or recorded testimony if needed. I will not put him directly in front of her if it causes that level of distress. Todd's eyes filled. You can do that. Yes, Judge Matthew said, and based on this letter I should have offered it sooner. Todd wiped his face. Thank you. Judge Matthew tapped the letter gently. This is not a tantrum, this is a disabled adult explaining fear, loss of control, and trauma in his own words. I am taking it seriously. Todd nodded, but he couldn't speak right away. Judge Matthew said, Does Will understand that this letter will become part of the case? Todd took a breath. Yes, he told us to put his name on it. He said he was done with Linda. The judge looked down at the last line. My name is Will, and I'm fucking done with Linda. For a second, Todd thought the judge might criticize the language. But Judge Matthew only said, that may be the clearest sentence in the whole thing. Todd let out a broken laugh that turned into a sob. I'm sorry, Todd said. Judge Matthew shook his head. Don't apologize, you're a father trying to protect your son. Todd whispered, I should have protected him before. Judge Matthew's voice softened. You know now, what matters is what you do next. Todd nodded, then next is Linda stays away from him. Judge Matthew looked at the file on his desk. I will review this today. I will also make a note that any future testimony from Will must be done with accommodations and without direct contact with Linda. When Todd got home, Bate was waiting in the living room. Henry was sitting beside Will on the couch, quiet for once. Will looked at Todd right away. His tablet was already on his lap. Will typed, did he read it? Todd sat down in front of him. Yes. Will typed, did he believe me? Todd's face softened. Yes, son, he believed you. Will stared at him like those words didn't make sense. Will typed, I don't have to see her. Todd shook his head. No, the judge said you do not have to be in the same room as Linda. Will's eyes filled. Bate whispered, thank God. Henry leaned back and breathed out hard. Good. Will typed slowly, so my letter was enough. Todd nodded, your words were enough. Will looked down at the tablet. Then he typed, my voice worked. Todd broke. He leaned forward and hugged Will carefully. Yes, Todd said through tears, your voice worked. Will cried into his dad's shoulder, but this time it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like something inside him finally let go. Henry wiped his face fast and looked away. Bates sat beside them and put a hand on Will's back. Will typed again after a while. Dad, did he call her grandma? Todd shook his head. No, he called her Linda. Will nodded. Good. Henry said, because that's who she is. Will looked at him and typed, no joke. Henry shook his head. No joke. Later that day, Will sat in the living room with his tablet on his lap. Todd was still standing by the door, his coat half on, like he was ready to go back to the courthouse if Will changed his mind. Will typed, if I need to talk with the judge. Todd walked closer. You won't be in the same room as Linda. Will stared at him. Todd said it again, slower. You won't see her. The judge already said that. If you talk to him, it will be away from Linda. Separate room, video, written statement, whatever keeps you safe. Will's fingers moved across the tablet. Will typed, then don't drop this case. I want her away for good. Bates' eyes filled right away. Todd bent down in front of Will's power chair. Are you sure, son? Will typed, yes, I'm scared, but I'm more scared if everyone stops because I'm scared. Henry looked up fast. Will kept typing. Linda wants me quiet. She took my iPad because she wanted me quiet. I don't want to be quiet now. Todd nodded, tears in his eyes. Then we won't drop it. Will typed, promise. Todd put his hand over his heart. I promise we keep going. Bates sat beside Will and rubbed his arm. And we keep you protected the whole time. Will typed, no seeing her. Todd said, no seeing her. Will typed, no phone calls. Bates said, no phone calls. Will typed, no messages through family. Henry said, no messages through anybody. Will looked at Henry. Henry shrugged, what, I'm on the team too. Will almost smiled, but his face stayed tired. Will typed, then I will talk to Judge Matthew. The next day, Todd called the courthouse. Bates sat at the table with him while Will waited in the living room. Henry stayed beside Will, not joking, not pushing, just being there. Todd spoke clearly into the phone. My son is willing to speak with Judge Matthew, but only with accommodations. He cannot be in the same room as Linda, he cannot see her, he cannot hear her. If those things can't be promised, he won't testify. Will watched his dad carefully. Todd listened, then nodded. Yes, separate room is fine, video is fine if Linda can't see him, written questions are fine, but he needs to feel safe. Bate reached for Todd's hand. Todd listened again. Then he looked at Will. They said Judge Matthew will meet with you privately first, Todd said softly. Just you, me, and whoever has to be there. Linda will not be there. Will's hands shook. Will typed when. Todd said tomorrow morning. Will looked down at the tablet for a long time. Then he typed, I hate tomorrow. Henry said, me too. Will typed, but I want it over. Todd nodded, then we'll get through tomorrow together. That night bedtime came, and Will's fear came with it. Todd helped Will get ready and made sure the window was locked. Then he checked the door, then he checked the closet, even though they both knew nobody was inside. Will watched every move. Todd said window locked, door locked, closet clear, you're safe. Will typed, say it again. Todd sat beside the bed, you're safe, Linda is not here, she doesn't get to take you, she doesn't get to touch your tablet, she doesn't get to decide anything. Will's eyes filled. Will typed, tomorrow I decide. Todd nodded, tomorrow you decide. The next morning the house was quiet. Bate packed Will's bag twice, making sure his charger was inside. Henry checked it too. Will typed, stop checking my stuff like I'm going to war. Henry looked at him. Bate froze. Todd waited. Then Henry said, feels like you are. Will looked away. Will typed, yeah. At the courthouse, Todd parked the van and turned around to face Will. We can still leave, Todd said, you know that, right? Will typed, no, I said don't drop it. Todd nodded, okay. They entered through a side door so Will wouldn't have to go near the main hallway. A court officer led them to a small private room. No crowd, no Linda, no loud voices. Judge Matthew came in a few minutes later. He didn't stand over Will, he pulled a chair across from him and sat down. Hi Will, Judge Matthew said, thank you for coming. Will typed, is Linda here? Judge Matthew answered right away. She is in the building, but she is not near this room. She cannot see you, she cannot hear you, you do not have to see her today. Will let out a shaky breath. Judge Matthew said, your father gave me your letter, I read all of it. Will typed, did you believe me? Judge Matthew leaned forward a little. Yes, I believe that you are afraid, I believe that your voice was taken from you, and I believe you have the right to be protected. Will stared at him. Then he typed, good, because I'm not lying. Judge Matthew nodded, I know. Todd stood behind Will, one hand on the back of his chair, trying to stay quiet. Judge Matthew said, Will, I only need you to answer what you can. If you need a break, we stop. If you don't want to answer something, you can say that. Will typed, I want Linda away for good. Judge Matthew said, tell me why. Will's face tightened, but he kept typing. Will typed, because when she is near me, I don't feel like a person, I feel like property, I feel like because I have cerebral palsy. She thinks she can decide what is real for me. Todd closed his eyes. Will typed, my life is not fake, my chair is not fake, my tablet is not fake, my needs are not fake. Linda wanted to take all of that away. Judge Matthew listened without interrupting. Will typed, she is not my grandmother, she is Linda, I want the court to call her Linda. Judge Matthew nodded, okay. Will typed, I want no contact, not a little, not birthdays, not holidays, not family talks, nothing. Judge Matthew said, I understand. Will typed, I still get scared at night because of her, I make dad check the window, I know I'm 25 but I feel like a little kid when I go to bed now. Todd wiped his face. Will typed, I hate that she made me like this. Judge Matthew's voice stayed gentle. Will, you are not wrong for being scared. Will typed, I know, but I still hate it. Judge Matthew said, that makes sense. Will looked at Todd, then back at the judge. Will typed, my dad and mom told me I didn't destroy the family. Todd whispered, you didn't. Will typed, I know that in my head, not in my heart yet. Judge Matthew looked at Todd, then at Will. That takes time. Will typed, I don't want time with Linda, I want time away from Linda. Judge Matthew nodded slowly, that is very clear. Will typed one more thing. I'm fucking done with Linda. Todd looked nervous for half a second, but Judge Matthew didn't look angry. The judge simply said, I understood that from your letter too. Will sat back in his chair, breathing hard. Todd bent down, you did it, son. Will typed, is it enough? Judge Matthew closed the folder in front of him. It is enough for me to take this seriously. I will be putting protections in place while the case continues. Will's eyes filled again. Will typed, so we're not dropping it. Todd shook his head, no, we're not dropping it. Judge Matthew said, no one is asking you to be quiet, Will. Will looked down at his tablet. Then he typed, good, because this is my voice. Judge Matthew said, Will, your lawyer and either your mom or dad will be there when Linda gives her testimony. You will not be alone in this. Will looked at Todd, then back at the judge. Will typed, thank you, Your Honor. Judge Matthew nodded, you're welcome, Will, and I want you to understand something. This court is not here to punish you for being afraid. This court is here to hear the truth. Will typed, I don't want to hear her voice. Judge Matthew said, then we will make sure you do not hear it unless you choose to. Your lawyer can listen for you. Your father or mother can be present. You can stay in a separate room. Will typed, so Linda talks, but I don't have to be near her. Judge Matthew said, correct. Will typed, and she can't see me. Judge Matthew said, she cannot see you. Will let out a shaky breath. Todd said, you're safe. Will typed, I know, I just don't feel it yet. Judge Matthew's face softened, that is understandable. Will looked down at his tablet for a long moment. Will typed, I want my dad there. Todd blinked fast. Of course, Todd said, I'll be there. Will typed, mom too if she can. Judge Matthew said, your lawyer can help request that. If both parents are not allowed in the testimony room at the same time, one can stay with you and one can stay nearby. Will typed, I don't want Henry there. Todd looked surprised. Will typed, not because I don't love him, because he is a kid. Linda already took enough from this family. Todd's eyes filled, that's fair, son. Will typed, tell Henry I said that before he gets mad. Todd gave a sad little smile, I'll tell him. The next day, Linda and her lawyer were in the courtroom with Todd and Will's lawyer. Will was not in the room. He was in a separate private room down the hall with Bate, his AAC tablet on his lap, and a court officer outside the door. Todd sat at the table beside Will's lawyer. He kept his hands folded, but inside he was angry. Just seeing Linda across the room made his chest tight. Linda's lawyer stood up and said, Your Honor, my client's grandson is suing, not her son. Mr. Carter should not be speaking for him. Todd's jaw tightened. Will's lawyer stood calmly. Your Honor, Will is an adult with cerebral palsy who communicates through an AAC device. Todd Carter is not replacing Will's voice. He is here as Will's support person and caregiver. Will's written statement has already been submitted under his own name. Judge Matthew looked at Linda's lawyer. Counsel, I have read Will's statement. I have also spoken with Will directly. This court is aware of who is speaking and whose case this is. Linda shifted in her seat and whispered something to her lawyer. Todd looked down at the table, trying not to look at her. Linda's lawyer said, My client believes the family has turned Will against her. Todd's head snapped up, turned him against her. Will's lawyer put a hand slightly in front of Todd. Mr. Carter. Todd breathed hard and sat back. Judge Matthew looked at Todd. Mr. Carter, I understand this is emotional, but let your lawyer speak. Todd nodded, Yes, Your Honor. Will's lawyer said, Your Honor, Will's fear did not come from family influence. It came from Linda's actions. She took away his communication device. She dismissed his disability. She arranged for him to be removed from his home without consent. Since then, Will has had fear around bedtime, fear in his own room, and ongoing distress. Linda said under her breath, That's not true. Judge Matthew looked at her. You will have your chance to testify, Ms. Linda. Do not interrupt. Todd felt a small bit of relief when the judge called her Linda, not grandmother. Linda's lawyer said, My client only wanted to help her grandson. Will's lawyer answered, Will has been clear. He does not see her as his grandmother. He sees her as the person who hurt him. Linda started crying. I loved him. I was trying to save him. Todd couldn't hold it in. From what? His own life. Judge Matthew's voice got firm. Mr. Carter. Todd looked down. Sorry, Your Honor. Linda's lawyer turned toward Todd. This is exactly the problem. The father is emotional and angry. Todd looked at him. Of course I'm angry, she took my son's voice. The courtroom went quiet. Will's lawyer said, Your Honor, this is why accommodations were requested. The family is not trying to dramatize this. They are trying to protect Will from further harm. Judge Matthew nodded. I understand. Down the hall, Bates sat beside Will in the private room. A court worker had told them they did not have to listen to Linda unless Will chose to. Will stared at his tablet. Will typed, Is Dad okay? Bates said, He's okay. Will typed, Is Linda crying? Bates hesitated. Will looked at her. Bates said softly, Probably. Will typed, I don't care if she cries. Bates nodded, You don't have to. Will typed, She made me cry more. Bates reached for his hand. Yes, she did. Back in the courtroom, Judge Matthew looked at Linda's lawyer. This hearing is not about whether Linda feels misunderstood, it is about whether Will needs protection. Linda's lawyer said, and we believe the request is excessive. Will's lawyer said, no contact is not excessive when the protected person is afraid to sleep in his own room. Todd closed his eyes for a second. Judge Matthew looked toward Linda. Ms. Linda, when you testify, you will answer the questions clearly. You will not refer to Will as confused, fake, or manipulated unless you have evidence beyond your personal opinion. Linda's face hardened. Todd saw it. That was the face Will was scared of. Linda said, he doesn't understand what's best for him. Todd's hands curled into fists under the table. Will's lawyer said, Your Honor, that statement is exactly why Will is asking for protection. Judge Matthew looked at Linda. Will is an adult. Disability does not erase his right to decide who is safe for him. Linda looked away. Down the hall, Bates' phone buzzed with a short update from Will's lawyer's assistant. Bates read it, then looked at Will. The judge said disability does not erase your right to decide who is safe. Will stared at her. Then he typed, he said that. Bates nodded, yes. Will's eyes filled. Will typed, good. Bates smiled sadly, very good. Will typed again. Tell Dad don't yell. Bates almost laughed through her tears, I'll tell him. In the courtroom, Todd's phone buzzed. He looked down and saw Bates' message. Will says don't yell. Todd let out a shaky breath and almost smiled. Will's lawyer noticed, everything okay? Todd nodded quietly, yeah, my son just told me to behave. Judge Matthew looked at Todd, that sounds like good advice. Todd nodded, yes, Your Honor. For the first time all morning, Todd unclenched his hands. Then in the private room, Will sat with Bates beside him, his tablet on his lap. His hands were shaking, but his face looked different now, not calm, not happy, but decided. Will typed, guard, I changed my mind, tell everyone I'll go in the courtroom. Bates looked at him fast, Will. Will typed, Mom, I know. The court officer stepped closer, are you sure? Will nodded. A few minutes later, Judge Matthew was told and the courtroom went quiet. Todd looked toward the door, confused and scared. Judge Matthew said, bring Will in slowly, and Linda is not to speak to him or look directly at him. Linda's lawyer started to stand, Your Honor. Judge Matthew held up one hand, no, this is not up for debate. The doors opened. Will came in using his power chair, Bates walked behind him and the court officer stayed close. The whole room felt heavy, Todd's eyes filled the second he saw his son. Will did not look at Linda. He drove his chair straight toward his lawyer's table. Judge Matthew leaned forward, Will, are you good? Will's fingers moved across his tablet. Will typed, yes, but it is hurting my dad, so I will stay by my lawyer as my parents sit behind me. Todd shook his head a little, like he wanted to say no, like he wanted to protect Will from everything. Judge Matthew said, are you sure? Will looked at Todd, then back at the judge. Will typed, this is my fight, not my dad's. The courtroom went silent. Todd covered his mouth. Bates put a hand on Todd's shoulder and guided him to the row behind Will. Todd sat down slowly, tears already running down his face. Will's lawyer pulled a chair aside so Will could park his power chair at the table. Will, his lawyer said softly, you can stop at any time. Will typed, I know. Linda stared at him from the other table, but Judge Matthew noticed immediately. Ms. Linda, the judge said firmly, eyes forward. Linda looked down. Will typed, thank you, Your Honor. Judge Matthew nodded, you're welcome. Linda's lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, I must object to this emotional display. My client is being treated like a monster in front of her own grandson. Will's head snapped up. His fingers hit the tablet fast. Will typed, I am not her grandson. His lawyer looked at the judge. Your Honor, may Will's statement be entered? Judge Matthew said, go ahead. Will's tablet spoke again. She is my father's mother, that does not make her my grandmother. Grandmothers do not take your voice. Grandmothers do not make you scared to sleep. Grandmothers do not send someone to take you somewhere unknown. Linda began crying. Will, I was trying to help you. Judge Matthew's voice cut through the room. Ms. Linda, do not address him. Will flinched at her voice. Todd started to rise. Bate grabbed his arm. Todd, no. Will turned his chair slightly, just enough to see his father. Will typed, Dad, sit. Todd froze. Will typed again, please. Todd sat back down broken. Will faced forward again. Will typed, I don't want my dad fighting for me today because Linda already made him feel like he failed me. He didn't fail me, she did this. Todd sobbed quietly behind him. Will typed, my mom didn't fail me, my brother didn't fail me, I didn't fail me. Linda hurt me and then she let the family break around it. Linda's lawyer said, Will, isn't it true that your parents told you to say these things? Will's lawyer stood, objection. Judge Matthew said, sustained. Counsel, you will not question him as if his disability makes his words less his own. Will typed before anyone else could speak. My parents told me I didn't have to come in here. Judge Matthew looked at him, do you want that answer on record? Will typed yes. The judge nodded, it will be on record. Will looked down at his tablet, breathing hard. Then he typed, I came in because Linda keeps acting like this is about everyone except me, it is about me. His tablet spoke each word clearly. I am 25, I have cerebral palsy, I use a power chair, I use diapers, I use this tablet because talking is hard, none of that makes my life fake. Linda looked away. Will typed, Linda kept saying my life was fake, she said people were making me like this, but this is my life, I don't need her to understand it, I need her to stay away from it. Todd whispered, that's my boy. Bates squeezed his hand. Will's lawyer asked gently, Will, what are you asking the court for? Will typed, no contact, for good. The lawyer asked, do you want calls? Will typed, no. Letters? No. Messages through family? No. Visits? Will's hands shook harder. He typed, never. Judge Matthew watched him carefully. Will, do you understand what you are asking? Will typed, yes, I'm asking to feel safe in my own house again. No one spoke for a moment. Then Judge Matthew said, that is very clear. Linda's lawyer stood again, quieter this time. Your Honor, my client would like to testify. Judge Matthew nodded, she may, but will not be questioned directly by her and she will not address him. Will turned slightly toward his lawyer. Will typed, can I stay? His lawyer asked, are you sure? Will typed, yes, but if she says my life is fake, I leave. Judge Matthew nodded, that is allowed. Todd leaned forward from behind him, son, you don't have to prove anything else. Will looked back at him. Will typed, I know I'm not proving, I'm taking back the room. Todd broke again, but this time he stayed seated. Bate whispered, let him. Will faced forward. Linda's lawyer stood beside her and asked, why do you want Will away? Linda wiped her eyes like she wanted the whole room to feel sorry for her. Linda said, my son should have his life back. When I was younger, my neighbor had a kid like that. Once she was 21, she was in a group home. Todd has a second boy who is normal, but no one wants to change a grown man's diaper at 70. I don't want that for my son. The courtroom went dead quiet. Todd's face went red. Bate grabbed his hand from behind Will, holding him down before he could stand. Will sat at his lawyer's table frozen. His tablet was on his lap, but his fingers did not move at first. Judge Matthew stared at Linda. Ms. Linda, choose your words carefully. Linda's lawyer looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client is trying to explain her concern for her son. Will's lawyer stood up slowly. No, Your Honor, she just explained exactly why Will is asking for protection. Linda frowned. I love my son. Will's lawyer said this case is not about Todd losing his life. This case is about Will having the right to his. Will's hands finally moved. Will typed, Your Honor, can I say something? Judge Matthew looked at him. Yes, Will. Will lifted his tablet so everyone could hear. Will typed, that is why I want her away. Todd started crying behind him. Will typed, she does not see me as a person, she sees me as work. She sees my diapers, my chair, my tablet, and my cerebral palsy, but she does not see me. Linda looked down. Will typed, she said my brother is normal, that means she thinks I am not, that means she thinks my life is less. Will typed, my dad does not need his life back from me, I am part of his life. My mom does not need her life back from me, my brother does not need a life without me, they love me. Todd whispered, yes we do. Judge Matthew let it stand. Will typed, Linda thinks helping me means removing me. My parents think helping me means listening to me. Will looked at Linda for the first time. His whole body shook, but he did not turn away. Will typed, I am not that neighbor's kid, I am Will. Linda's mouth opened, but Judge Matthew raised his hand. Do not speak to him, the judge said. Will kept typing. Will typed, I know changing me is hard, I know helping me is hard, I know I need a lot, I know that. I live in this body every day, but being hard to care for does not mean I should be thrown away. Todd broke down behind him. Bate held his hand and whispered, let him talk. Will typed, Linda did not do this because she cared about me, she did this because she was ashamed of me, she was ashamed of what my dad's life looked like. She was ashamed that I was still home, she was ashamed that I use diapers, she was ashamed that I use a tablet. Will's lawyer gently asked, Will, what do you want the court to understand? Will typed, I want the court to understand that Linda is dangerous to me because she thinks she knows better than me about my own life. Judge Matthew nodded slowly. Will typed, if she thinks I should be in a group home, then she will keep trying to make that happen. If she thinks my tablet is fake, she will take it again. If she thinks my parents are wrong for caring for me, she will keep attacking them. Linda cried harder, I was trying to save Todd. Will typed fast. From me. The whole courtroom went silent again. Will typed, you were trying to save my dad from me. Linda didn't answer. Will typed, that is why I'm fucking done with you. Linda's lawyer stood, Your Honor. Judge Matthew cut him off, sit down. The lawyer sat. Judge Matthew looked at Will, Will, do you need a break? Will typed, no, I want this done. Judge Matthew nodded, okay. Will typed one more sentence. I want no contact because Linda does not want me safe, she wants me gone. Todd leaned forward sobbing quietly, son. Will turned his chair just a little. Will typed, Dad, I am not your burden. Todd shook his head hard, never, never will. Will typed, I know, I just needed to say it in front of her. Bate cried into her hand. Judge Matthew looked at Linda. Ms. Linda, he said, your own testimony has made clear that you view Will's disability as a problem to be removed from your son's life. That is deeply relevant to this court. Linda's face went pale. Will's lawyer stood up and looked straight at Linda. Linda, he said, are you an ableist? Linda's lawyer shot up from his chair, objection, Your Honor. Will's lawyer did not back down. She opened the door to this topic with her own testimony. She described Will as abnormal, compared him to a neighbor's child being put away, and said Todd needed his life back from his disabled son. Judge Matthew looked at Linda's lawyer, then at Will's lawyer. Overruled, Judge Matthew said, she may answer. Linda looked angry now, the fake tears were gone. She looked toward Will, but Judge Matthew's voice cut in fast. Ms. Linda, you will look at the attorney, not at Will. Linda turned back. Will's lawyer asked again, slower, are you an ableist? Linda's face twisted. I'm a realist, Linda said, people like him are devil bobbies. The whole courtroom froze. Todd stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Bate gasped and grabbed his arm, Todd, don't. Todd's voice broke, she called my son what? Judge Matthew slammed his hand down, order. Will sat completely still at the table. His eyes were wide. His tablet sat on his lap, but for a second he could not move. Will's lawyer turned toward Judge Matthew. Your Honor, I ask that her statement be entered into the record exactly as said. Judge Matthew's face was cold. It will be. Linda's lawyer looked panicked. Your Honor, my client is emotional. Judge Matthew cut him off. Your client is under oath. Linda said, I didn't mean it like that. Will's fingers finally moved. The tablet spoke. Yes, you did. Everyone looked at Will. His hands shook badly, but he kept typing. Will typed, that is what you think of me, that is why you took my iPad, that is why you wanted me gone, you don't think I am a man, you don't think I am a person, you think I am something wrong. Todd's face crumpled. Will typed, I am not a devil baby, I am Will. Judge Matthew leaned forward. Will, do you need a break? Will typed, no. Bate whispered, baby. Will typed louder through the tablet, no, I want her words in the record. Will's lawyer nodded, they are. Will turned his chair slightly, not enough to face Linda fully, but enough to make it clear he was not hiding anymore. Will typed, you called me fake, you called my life fake, now you call me that, thank you for showing the judge who you are. Linda started crying again, Will, I love you. Will flinched. Judge Matthew's voice got sharp, Ms. Linda, do not address him again. Will typed, no you don't, you love the idea of Dad having a normal life, you love the idea of me disappearing, that is not love. Todd sat back down behind Will, sobbing into his hands. Will typed, Dad, don't cry for her words, she doesn't get that much power. Todd looked up through tears. Will typed, cry because I'm still here. Bate broke down then, covering her mouth. Todd nodded, his voice barely working, you're still here, son. Will faced the judge again. Will typed, Your Honor, I want no contact forever. I don't want her near me, my house, my parents, my brother, my tablet, or my life. Judge Matthew nodded slowly, I understand. Will typed, and I want the court to stop calling her family to me. She is not my family, she is the person who hurt me. Linda's lawyer tried again. Your Honor, this is becoming emotional and prejudicial. Judge Matthew looked at him. Your client called a disabled adult a devil baby while under oath. The prejudice in this room did not come from Will. The lawyer sat down. Will's lawyer asked softly, Will, is there anything else you want the court to hear? Will looked down at his tablet. For a moment he looked tired, small, and hurt. Then he typed, I was scared of her before, now I know I was right to be scared. The courtroom was silent. Will typed, but I'm not scared of the truth anymore. Judge Matthew nodded, that is enough, Will. Will looked back at Todd and Bate. Will typed, can I leave now? Judge Matthew said, yes, you may leave the courtroom, your lawyer and your parents may remain if needed. Todd started to stand. Will typed, Dad, stay, finish it. Todd froze. Will typed, Mom can come with me, you stay with my lawyer, I want this done. Todd's face broke again, but he nodded, okay, son. Bate came around and walked beside Will's power chair. Before Will left, he stopped at the door and typed one more thing. Linda, you did not destroy me. Judge Matthew allowed the words to stand. Will typed, you just proved me right. Then Bate opened the door and Will drove out of the courtroom with his tablet still in his lap. The second the door closed behind them, his face broke. Will's hands shook so badly, he could barely touch the tablet. Will typed, Mom, hug me. Bate didn't ask anything. She dropped to her knees in front of him and wrapped her arms around him carefully. The moment she held him, Will sobbed hard. Not quiet tears. Not the kind he tried to hide. He sobbed like every word Linda said had finally hit his body all at once. Bate held him tighter. I got you, baby, I got you. Will cried into her shoulder, his tablet resting against his lap. The court officer looked away to give them privacy. Will typed with one shaky hand, she said devil baby. Bate's own tears fell, I know. Will typed, Mom, am I bad? Bate pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. No, no, Will, you are not bad, you are my son, you are loved, you are not what she called you. Will cried harder. Will typed, why does she hate me? Bate shook her head, crying with him, because something is wrong in her heart, not yours. Will typed, I wanted to be strong. Bate wiped his face gently. You were strong, being strong doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Will leaned forward again, and Bate held him as he sobbed. Inside the courtroom, Todd heard the muffled sound of Will crying in the hallway. His whole body went stiff. Will's lawyer put a hand on his arm. Mr. Carter, stay seated. Todd whispered, that's my son. Judge Matthew heard it too, his face tightened. Linda sat at the other table, suddenly smaller than before. Judge Matthew looked straight at her. Ms. Linda, your testimony has done more damage to your position than any argument from counsel could have. Linda's lawyer stood. Your Honor, I would like a recess to speak with my client. Judge Matthew said, take a 15-minute break. Linda's lawyer started to speak again, but the judge raised one hand. No, we are taking a break. Then Judge Matthew looked at Todd and Will's lawyer. Mr. Carter, counsel, you two come with me. Todd stood up slowly, still shaken from hearing Will sob in the hallway. Judge Matthew looked toward the door, and Bate and Will, bring them to my chambers, I want to check on him myself. Linda's lawyer frowned. Your Honor, is that appropriate? Judge Matthew looked at him coldly. After what your client said in open court, I am making sure the protected person is stable and understands his options. Sit down. Linda looked away. Todd walked out with Will's lawyer and followed the court officer down the hall. Bate was still kneeling beside Will, holding his hand. Will's eyes were red, his breathing uneven, and his tablet rested against his lap. Todd came closer. Son. Will looked up at him. Will typed, did I mess up? Todd shook his head fast. No, Will, you didn't mess up anything. Judge Matthew stepped into the hallway. His voice was softer now. Will, I would like to speak with you in my chambers. Your mom, dad, and lawyer can be there. Linda will not be there. Will looked scared again. He typed, am I in trouble? Judge Matthew's face changed. No, you are not in trouble. Will typed, then why? Judge Matthew said, because what Linda said was cruel, and I want to make sure you are okay enough to continue this hearing. I also want you to know you do not have to go back into that courtroom. Will stared at him. Bate rubbed his shoulder. It's okay, baby. Will typed, okay, but Dad comes. Todd said, I'm right here. They went into Judge Matthew's chambers. It was quieter than the courtroom, with bookshelves, a desk, and a small table. The judge did not sit behind his big desk. Instead, he sat at the table across from Will like he didn't want to tower over him. Todd sat on one side of Will, Bate sat on the other. Will's lawyer stood close by. Judge Matthew said, Will, I need to ask you something and I want you to answer honestly. Do you feel able to keep going today? Will looked down at his tablet. He typed, I don't want to go back in. Judge Matthew nodded, that is allowed. Will typed, but I want the case to keep going. It can, Judge Matthew said, your lawyer can continue for you. Will typed, will Linda still get away with what she said? Judge Matthew's expression hardened. No, her words are part of the record now. Will typed, she called me devil baby. Bate started crying again. Judge Matthew said quietly, I heard her. Will typed, I'm not that. Judge Matthew leaned forward slightly. No, Will, you are not. You are a person. You are an adult. You are a son. You are a brother. You are not the words she used. Will's chin trembled. Will typed, then why did she say it like it was true? Todd's voice broke, because Linda is wrong, son. Judge Matthew nodded. Your father is right. Sometimes people say hateful things with confidence. That does not make them true. Will cried again, quieter this time. He typed, I wanted to be brave. Judge Matthew said, you were brave. Will typed, I left. Judge Matthew said, leaving was brave too. Will looked confused. The judge continued, bravery is not staying until you break. Bravery is knowing when you have said enough and protecting yourself. Will looked at Bate. Bate nodded through tears, that's what you did. Todd touched Will's hand. You told the truth, you faced her, then you got yourself out before she could hurt you more, that's strong. Will typed, Dad, did it hurt you? Todd swallowed hard. Hearing her talk about you like that hurt me, but you did not hurt me. Will typed, I came in because she was hurting you. Todd shook his head. I know, but this is not your job to carry alone. Will typed, I said it was my fight. Todd leaned closer. It is your fight, but we are your family, we fight with you. Will looked between Todd and Bate. Then he typed, not Linda. Bate said, no, Linda is not your family if she chooses to hurt you. Judge Matthew looked at Will's lawyer. Counsel, I am keeping the temporary no-contact order active. After what was said today, I am strongly considering a long-term order. I will allow you to continue without Will present. Will's lawyer nodded, thank you, Your Honor. Will typed, can Dad stay in court? Todd looked at him. Son, I can stay with you. Will shook his head. Will typed no, Mom stays with me. Dad and lawyer finish. Dad promised no yelling. Judge Matthew looked at Todd. Can you keep that promise, Mr. Carter? Todd wiped his face and nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Will typed Dad say it. Todd looked at his son. I promise no yelling. Will typed good. Judge Matthew stood. Then here is what will happen. Will, you and your mother may stay in this chamber or another private room. You do not have to hear Linda. You do not have to see Linda. Your father and lawyer will return to court. I will finish the hearing. Will typed, and my words still count. Judge Matthew said, yes, your words count. Will let out a shaky breath. Then he typed, okay. Todd bent down and hugged Will carefully. I'm proud of you. Will typed, I'm tired of people saying that. Todd gave a sad little smile. Okay, then I love you. Will leaned into him. Will typed, that one is okay. Bate kissed Will's forehead. I'll stay with you. Will nodded. Before Todd left the chamber, Will typed one more thing. Dad. Todd turned around. Yeah. Will typed, don't let Linda make this about you. She hurt me. Todd's eyes filled again, but he nodded. You're right, Todd said. This is about you. Will typed, and I want her away for good. Todd stood straighter. Then that's what we finish. Todd walked back toward the courtroom with Will's lawyer. His hands still shook, but he kept his promise. He did not yell. When the hearing started again, Judge Matthew returned to the bench and looked directly at Linda. Let the record reflect that Will not be returning to the courtroom. He has given enough testimony for today. His absence will not be used against him. Linda's lawyer opened his mouth. Judge Matthew said, do not test me, counsel. The lawyer sat back down. Will's lawyer stood. Your Honor, today Linda told this court exactly why Will needs protection. She does not respect his adulthood. She does not respect his disability. She does not respect his communication. She sees him as a burden, not a person. That makes her unsafe. Todd sat beside him, silent but steady. Linda sat back down, but she was not calm anymore. Her face was red, her hands gripped the table. Then she snapped. Fake, fake, Linda said, her voice getting louder. He is faking, Your Honor, but only me, only I can see that. The courtroom went silent again. Todd's jaw tightened, but he remembered Will's promise. No yelling. Will's lawyer stood slowly. Your Honor, this is exactly the danger. Linda continues to deny Will's disability, his communication needs, and his trauma even after hearing directly from him. Linda pointed toward the door where Will had left. He can type all those words, can't he? He knows how to make everyone feel bad for him. Todd's hands shook under the table. Will's lawyer said he uses an AAC tablet because of cerebral palsy. That is not manipulation, that is communication. Linda said, no, Todd made him like this. Bate lets him act like a baby, they baby him, they keep him in diapers, they make him weak. Todd closed his eyes. Will's lawyer turned toward Judge Matthew. Your Honor, Linda has now called Will fake, called him a devil baby, and suggested his disability and care needs are not real. This is not concern, this is prejudice and control. Judge Matthew looked at Linda, his voice was cold. Ms. Linda, I am warning you, one more outburst and I will have you removed from this courtroom. Linda's lawyer whispered to her, stop talking. Linda shook her head. No, I won't stop, everybody is blind. My son is wasting his life changing diapers and pushing a chair around. Will should be somewhere with people trained for that. Todd breathed in hard, but he stayed seated. Will's lawyer said, there it is again. She wants Will removed from his home because she does not approve of his care needs. Linda snapped because it's not normal. Judge Matthew leaned forward. Normal is not the legal standard in my courtroom, Ms. Linda. Safety is, consent is, dignity is. Linda looked away. In Judge Matthew's chambers, Bate sat with Will. The door was closed and they could not hear the courtroom. Will stared at his tablet. Will typed, is Dad yelling? Bate checked her phone. Todd had sent one short message. I'm keeping my promise. Bate smiled softly. No, he's not yelling. Will typed, good. Back in the courtroom, Will's lawyer stepped closer to the judge's bench. Your Honor, Will is asking for long-term no contact. Based on Linda's own words today, she has shown she is not safe for him. She does not respect his adulthood. She does not respect his disability. She does not respect his communication device. She does not respect his parents' role as caregivers. She believes he is fake, abnormal, and a burden. Linda's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client is emotional. She is an older woman who is scared for her son." Judge Matthew looked at him. "Counsel, being emotional does not excuse dehumanizing a disabled adult." Todd looked down at the table, tears falling quietly. Will's lawyer said, "Will told this court he wants Linda away for good. He said this is his fight. He came into this room, faced her, and spoke for himself." Linda responded by calling him fake. Judge Matthew nodded slowly. "I heard her." Linda muttered, "Because he is." Judge Matthew slammed his hand down. "That is enough." Linda's lawyer sat frozen. Judge Matthew said, "Ms. Linda, you are done testifying. You will not speak again unless I ask you a direct question." Linda opened her mouth. Judge Matthew's voice sharpened, "Do not." The courtroom went still. Judge Matthew looked at Will's lawyer. "Anything further?" Will's lawyer said, "Only this, Your Honor. Will should not have to be heard again before the court believes he is in danger. Linda's testimony today is enough." Judge Matthew looked at Todd. "Mr. Carter, you kept your promise to your son." Todd looked up surprised. The judge continued, "You did not yell. You allowed Will's lawyer to speak, and you allowed Will's words to remain central." Todd's voice broke, "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Matthew looked down at the file. The temporary no-contact order will remain in effect. Based on today's testimony, this court is granting a long-term no-contact order while the full written order is prepared. Linda is not to contact Will directly or indirectly. No visits, no calls, no letters, no messages through relatives, no approaching his home, therapy center, medical providers, or family members for the purpose of reaching him. Todd covered his mouth. Will's lawyer nodded, "Thank you, Your Honor." Linda gasped, "You can't do that, he's my grandson." Judge Matthew looked at her. "No, Ms. Linda, today he made it very clear he is Will, and he asked this court to protect him." Todd started crying, but he stayed quiet. The judge added, "And this court will." A few minutes later, Todd walked back into Judge Matthew's chambers. Will looked up right away. Will typed, "Is it done?" Todd knelt in front of him. His face was wet with tears, but this time he was smiling. "Yes, son," Todd said, "it's done." Will froze. Bate whispered, "What happened?" Todd looked at Will. "The judge granted the long-term no-contact order. Linda can't contact you, not through calls, letters, visits, or family. She can't come near you." Will stared at him. Will typed, "For good." Todd nodded, "For good." Will's hands started shaking again, but this time it was different. Will typed, "She can't take me." Todd shook his head, "No." Will typed, "She can't take my tablet." Bate said, "No." Will typed, "She can't call me fake anymore." Todd swallowed hard, "Not anywhere near you." Will leaned back in his chair, and tears rolled down his face. Will typed, "My voice worked." Todd reached for his hand. "Yes," Todd said, "your voice worked." Will typed, "Dad, you didn't yell." Todd gave a small broken laugh, "No, I promised you." Will looked at him for a long moment. Then he typed, "I'm proud of you too." Todd broke down and hugged him carefully. Bate wrapped her arms around both of them. Will cried again, but this time he did not cry because Linda had power. He cried because, for the first time in a long time, she had less. And when they left the courthouse, Linda was still behind them. But Will was going home. Henry was waiting in the living room when Bate, Todd, and Will came through the front door. He stood up fast. "How did it go?" Bate took a deep breath. "It was crazy." Todd helped Will get inside, then closed the door behind them. Henry looked from Bate to Todd, then down at Will. "What happened?" Todd's voice was tired. "She can't come near Will." Henry blinked. "For real?" Bate nodded. "For real, no calls, no visits, no letters, no messages through other people, nothing." Henry's shoulders dropped like he had been holding his breath all day. "Good." Will sat quietly in his power chair, his tablet resting on his lap. His eyes were red from crying and his face looked exhausted. Henry looked at Todd. "How do you feel?" Todd looked down for a second. "She's still my mom," he said quietly, "but she called Will a devil baby." Henry's face changed. Todd's jaw tightened. "So I don't care now, not about her." Bate whispered, "Todd." Todd shook his head. No, Bate, I'm done making space for her because she gave birth to me. She looked at my son and called him that. She called his life fake. She said I needed my life back from him. Henry looked like he wanted to punch a wall. She said that. Todd nodded in court under oath. Henry turned to Will. Bro. Will slowly typed. Will typed, don't say you're sorry. Henry stopped. Will typed, everyone keeps saying sorry. I know you are, I'm tired. Henry nodded, okay. Will typed, say something else. Henry thought for a second, then said, she lost. Will stared at him. Henry said, she tried to make everyone think you were fake and the judge still picked you, so she lost. Will looked down at his tablet. Will typed, I don't feel like I won. Bate walked over and kissed his forehead. You don't have to feel it today. Todd sat on the couch and covered his face with both hands. For the first time since they walked in, he let himself fall apart. Henry looked at him. Dad. Todd's voice cracked. I sat there and listened to my own mother talk about my son like he was a problem to throw away. Henry sat beside him, but you didn't yell. Todd wiped his face, because Will told me not to. Will typed, I'm proud of you. Todd looked up broken, you said that at court too. Will typed, still true. Bates sat beside Will and rubbed his arm, you were brave too. Will shook his head. Will typed, I was scared. Henry said, yeah, but you still went in, that counts. Will typed, I went in because Dad was hurting. Todd leaned forward, son, I need you to hear me, you did not have to protect me from Linda. Will typed, I know. Todd said, no, I mean it, I am your dad, I'm supposed to protect you. Will typed, you did, but today I protected me. The room went quiet. Bate wiped her eyes, yes, you did. Henry leaned back against the couch, so what happens now? Todd said, now we live without Linda. Will looked at him. Todd continued, no more explaining, no more family guilt, no more letting people say, but she's your mother. She is not allowed near this house. Will typed, or my therapy. Todd nodded, or your therapy. Will typed, or my tablet. Bates said, never again. Will typed, or bedtime. Todd's face softened, especially not bedtime. Henry looked confused, what do you mean? Will stared down at his tablet for a long time. Then he typed, she made bedtime scary. Henry's anger faded into sadness. Will typed, I still need Dad to check the window, door, closet, I know it sounds little. Henry shook his head, no it doesn't. Will typed, yes it does. Henry moved closer but not too close. Will, after what she did, wanting the room checked doesn't make you little, it makes you someone trying to sleep. Will looked at him. Henry shrugged, look, I'm not good at this serious stuff, but that's true. Will typed, that was actually good. Henry gave him a tiny smile, I have moments. Will rolled his eyes, but a small smile almost came. Todd noticed it and started crying again. Will typed, Dad, stop. Todd laughed through the tears, I can't help it. Will typed, you are worse than me. Bates smiled, he really is. Henry said, Dad needs a diaper after today too. Bates snapped, Henry. Henry held up his hands, bad joke too soon. Will stared at him. Then Will typed, one joke pass. Henry exhaled, thank you. Todd wiped his face, I hate that I laughed. Will typed, me too. For the first time that day, the room felt like their house again. Not fixed. Not healed. But theirs. Later that night, Todd helped Will get ready for bed. Bates stood in the doorway and Henry hovered in the hall like he didn't want to leave yet. Todd checked the window. Window locked. He checked the door. Door locked. He checked the closet. Closet clear. Will held his tablet close. Will typed, say the rest. Todd sat beside him. Linda is not here, Linda cannot come here, Linda cannot call you, Linda cannot take you, Linda cannot take your tablet, Linda does not decide your life. Will's eyes filled. Will typed, and. Todd took his hand, and you are not fake. Will cried quietly. Will typed, and. Todd's voice broke, and you are not a devil baby, you are Will, you are my son, you are loved. Bate wiped her face from the doorway. Henry looked down at the floor. Will typed, okay. Todd asked, do you want Mom? Will nodded. Bate came in and hugged him carefully. Will typed, Mom, stay a little. Bate kissed his head, of course. Henry stepped back, night Will. Will typed Henry. Henry stopped, yeah. Will typed thank you for saying she lost. Henry nodded, she did. Will typed say it again. Henry looked at him and said it clearly. She lost, you came home. Will breathed out slowly. Todd smiled through tears, that's right. Will looked around his room, the window was locked, the door was safe, his family was there. Linda was not. Will typed one last thing before his eyes started getting heavy. I came home. Bate held his hand. Todd stayed beside the bed. Henry stood in the hall. And for the first night in a long time, the room still felt scary, but it also felt protected. Linda had called him fake. But Will was home. And everyone who mattered knew he was real. After a while, Henry went to bed and Bates stepped into the hallway. Todd stayed beside Will a little longer, watching him carefully. Will's eyes opened again. His tablet was still beside him. Will typed, after tonight, Dad, you or Mom don't need to check. Todd froze. Bates stepped back into the room. Will, are you sure? Will nodded a little, then typed again. Thank you for today. Todd sat on the edge of the bed. Son, you don't have to thank us for protecting you. Will looked down at the blanket. Will typed, Dad, sorry I damaged you and Grandma's relationship. Todd's face broke immediately. Will, he said, shaking his head, no, son. Will typed, she is your mom. Todd took a slow breath, trying not to cry too hard. She was my mom, Todd said, but today she looked at my son and called him something evil. She called your life fake. She said I needed my life back from you. Will's eyes filled. Todd leaned closer. You did not damage that relationship. Linda did. She broke it when she hurt you. She broke it when she chose hate over love. Will typed, but if I never said anything, you still had a mom. Todd wiped his face. If you never said anything, I would have had a lie. I don't want a relationship built on you suffering in silence. Bate came to the other side of the bed and sat beside Will. Baby, telling the truth did not destroy this family, it saved it. Will looked between them. Will typed, it doesn't feel like saving. Todd nodded, I know, sometimes saving something hurts. Will typed, I don't want you sad. Todd gave a broken little smile. I'm sad because my mother failed you, I'm not sad because you spoke up. Will typed, you promise. Todd put his hand over Will's, I promise. Bate brushed Will's hair back, and I promise too. Will stared at the tablet for a long moment. Then he typed, I still might get scared. Todd nodded, then we'll help. Will typed, but I want to try no checking. Todd swallowed hard, okay, we can try. Bate said, and if you change your mind tomorrow, that's okay too. Will typed, no shame. Todd shook his head, no shame. Will looked toward the window, it was locked. He knew it was locked because Todd had checked it, but this time Will didn't ask him to check again. His hands trembled, but he kept them on the blanket. Will typed, Linda lost. Todd nodded, yes. Will typed, I came home. Bate smiled through tears, yes you did. Will typed, and I'm still Will. Todd's voice cracked, always. Bate leaned in and hugged him gently. Todd wrapped his arms around both of them. For a while nobody talked. Then Will typed one more thing. Dad. Todd pulled back, yeah son. Will typed, I'm sorry you lost your mom. Todd looked at him with wet eyes. Then he said, I didn't lose my son, that matters more. Will cried quietly, but this time he didn't cry like he was trapped. He cried like someone who was finally safe enough to let go. Bate kissed his forehead, try to sleep baby. Todd stood up slowly, he looked at the window then stopped himself from walking over to it again. Will noticed. Will typed Dad. Todd looked back. Will typed don't check. Todd nodded, tears running down his face, okay. He turned off the light. Bate stayed in the doorway for a second longer, then whispered, good night, Will. Will typed good night Mom, good night Dad. Todd said good night son, I love you. Will typed love you too. Todd and Bate stepped out and left the door cracked just enough for the hallway light to shine in. Will lay there in the dark. The room still felt a little scary. The window still pulled at his mind. The silence still felt heavy. But Linda could not come in. Linda could not call. Linda could not take his tablet. Linda could not take his voice. Will held his blanket close, looked toward the cracked door and breathed slowly. For the first time in a long time, nobody checked the room again. And nothing bad happened.